Okay, the materials you will need for this tutorial are: for paints, you will need Vallejo's Neutral Grey, Vallejo's German Grey, Vallejo's Ice Yellow, Vallejo's Pure White, the Mecca colour, and from Citadel you'll need Rhinox Hide, Troll Slayer Orange and Fire Dragon Bright. We've put all our paints on a wet palette which keeps them nice and moist. For brushes we've used the Artist Opus range. We've got a 00 and a size 2, but any high quality brush will do. Finally, as you may see in a moment, we use blue tack for holding the model on place on a little bit of a podium, just so we can paint it away from the model itself. Okay, let's get started with the base colours. So what we've done is we've got the sword away from the model on this little bit of blue tack. This makes it so you can see basically more what you're doing. You've got that posability, you won't get the model in the way. Then what I do is I put it under a lamp to make sure that the light, we can sort of tell where the light is hitting it. So we can naturally tell where naturally the light would fall if it was a metallic object. This is really important. If you use a lamp for this, you can sort of get a rough idea in your mind before you get started exactly where light falls. So we start with a neutral grey base colour. So we've used the Vallejo Neutral Grey. Darken it slightly if you want, with mixing it with the German Grey on your wet palette. It doesn't really matter what grey you use, just a series of colours with different stages and will really suffice here. But it is key to be prepared. As you'll see in the top left corner, I've laid out all the greys from dark to white on the palette, so I'm ready to go. I've got all my paints ready and I can just quickly move it into change so I can really get this gradient looking great. For the highlighting, use a mix of neutral grey and ice yellow to create your highlights. Gradually increase the amount of ice yellow for the lighter highlights. So basically just keep going. From there, keep blending successive layers of grey and increasing amounts of the ice yellow. Use thin, controlled brush strokes and blend those colours smoothly. Okay, reflections. Start by blocking in the main reflections using neutral grey mixed with a small amount of ice yellow. Focus on the areas where light would naturally catch, such as the curved part of the blade. You can still paint a non-metallic metal effect and make it look shiny without having to put highlights everywhere. Start being really subtle. Add finer details with lighter grey tones, paying attention to the angles of the blade to ensure that your reflections are consistent. The thing about this blade though in particular is that it has these serrated teeth and they get in the way of painting extra reflections. But since the blade is facing downwards, you can just put random reflections going down the blade. If you find that your lower edge highlight is a bit too thick and wobbly, go back in with the darker colour and just cut into it. You'll get a very sharp lower edge highlight this way. You can now move on to a little bit of glazing. So apply thin layers of glaze using watered down paint to smooth out your transitions and blend those colours seamlessly. When you're glazing, thin the paint between 50-50 water to paint and maybe 60-40 water to paint. It varies between whichever paint brands that you use and how much your paint has dried out. The more water that you add, obviously, the more layers of paint that you have to do, but patience, using thinner paint and lots of layers will give you a much smoother finish, and it's well worth the effort. Okay, here are some top tips. Use vertical strokes and draw the brush towards you for the most controlled application when you're making your marks. For water ratios, make sure you adjust your paint to water ratio depending on the paint brand and the consistency you need. There's no magic number here, I'm afraid, but it's typically between 50-50 and 60-40. As I said earlier, be patient with your layers. Apply multiple thin layers rather than the thick ones to avoid a chalky texture, especially when you're working with white paint. Next, we're going to look at the rust effect. So for the base of the rust colour, apply a base of Mournfang brown using a stippling technique. Use an older worn brush for this, and that will create a more natural texture. Over the Mournfang brown, stipple Troll Slayer orange in patches, leaving some areas darker for contrast. For the brighter highlights, if required, add Fire Dragon Bright to enhance the brightest parts of the rust. Now for the rust effects, the key is don't make the orange even all the way across the blade. Look for some areas where you want it to be stronger and leave other areas dark. This helps for the realism of the rust. Next up, add your scratches and your details. When painting your scratches, use a neutral grey and ice yellow to make those beat up details on the blade. Make sure that these marks look natural and varied. The very last thing you want to do is have them looking uniform and just a bit fake, really. For deeper scratches, paint a line of Rhynoxide or a darker grey to create a three-dimensional effect. For the final touches, look at refining those highlights. Use a very thin mix of ice yellow and white to refine the very brightest highlights. By adding ice yellow instead of white, it creates this nice sort of creamy yellowy effect, which gives the impression that it's a warmer light that's hitting the model. But be careful when you add your white highlights. They can very, very quickly overpower what you've painted. It's not a disaster if you paint them too large. You can go back with the other colours and knock them back, but be aware. Finally, if needed, apply a matte varnish to even out your texture and reduce your unwanted shine. So now hopefully you should have something that looks a little bit like the picture. Thank you so much for watching. You can find the full video of Richard's version on his website, which has got much longer clips of the painting process. We've kind of whizzed through it here. Once again, thanks again for watching, and I will hopefully see you again soon.